What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the True Mets Talk podcast YouTube channel. It is a New York Mets post-game show on this lovely Tuesday afternoon, February 25th, 2025. We are recapping some of the action that we saw happening today, this afternoon, between the New York Mets and the Houston Astros. Before we fully get into this recap, the notes, the updates, and talking about some other news and happenings with the New York Mets in spring training. As always, please do smash those subscribe buttons if you haven't subscribed already. Continue to drop those comments in the live chat of anything that you saw in this afternoon's game or any questions, comments, or concerns surrounding the New York Mets moving forward. I know that there's going to be a key emphasis on this starting rotation. We have some of the latest updates surrounding Kodai Senga as well, in which I'll be delving into right here. Rob is not able to join me on this post game, so I am flying solo. And as always, please do hit those thumbs up buttons on this stream. I thoroughly appreciate it. And again, I'll be doing post games. Whether Rob is up here or not, we'll be doing a lot together this season. So if you are new to the channel, whether you're catching this live, I know it's not even 5 p.m. on a Tuesday. Some people are still at work, and that's okay. Whether you're catching the replay, please do go ahead and subscribe. All right, let's get into it. This was the box score offensively in this game where the Astros actually did beat the Mets by a score of 8-5. The Mets getting a late run there in the top of the ninth inning. So they made it 8-5. But again, we're watching the process. We're watching some of these fringe players in terms of who's going to make the final push for that final roster spot and who is turning some heads, right? In terms of impressing us and potentially impressing this front office in terms of getting said roster spot. Everything was fantastic and looked fantastic in the first inning for the New York Mets, especially with the Luis Angel Acuna leading off, dumping a single into left center field. He then steals second base, causing a throwing error, and is able to advance over to third base on the throwing error, which went into center field. So that's a nice little way to start off the inning. And again, that's exactly what you're going to get out of Luis Angel Acuna, which is why a lot of people like to slate him in as that perfect 9-hole hitter to turn the lineup over, get on base any way that he can, potentially steal a base to get in scoring position for the top of the lineup, Lindor, Soto, etc. And that's the strength, and that's what you exactly would get out of Luis Angel Acuna if he makes the roster. Now, there are still a lot of things clearly in watching these early spring training at bats that Luis Angel Acuna needs to work on. He's seemingly having some trouble on some of the off-speed pitches. It seems like he's second-guessing himself and holding up his swing at the very last second. Again, as he gets more comfortable in terms of the in-game live action, I would expect that, that I guess mentality to shift in terms of actually swinging through some of those pitches that he's attempting and starting a swing and then ending up taking. But again, that's going to come with more in-game action as this spring training progresses. And he is in this battle now, not only with Jeff McNeil, but directly with Brett Baty in terms of vying for that last roster spot on the bench and being that utility ball player come opening day in Houston, against this very same Houston Astros squad in Houston on March 27th. So that is Luis Angel Acuna in a second at bat, actually, as well. After the base hit in the first inning, he notched an RBI as well. So he goes 1 for 3 with an RBI. Francisco Alvarez taking the 0 with 2 strikeouts. Now, Francisco Alvarez is a player that I am watching very closely, especially with those new mechanics. Everything about Francisco Alvarez's swing seems brand new in terms of the work that he did with JD Martinez, both the stance, the load, given the stance, and his follow through. Everything seems to be in a completely different manner and light for Francisco Alvarez. And he seems to be a little bit behind and late on some of these fastballs that I'm seeing. And he's also getting tied up on some of the down and out breaking balls, whether he swings at them or doesn't. It just seems like he has a hard time pulling the trigger right now in his swing. And I really want to see that actually progress and develop. And with a new swing, with new mechanics, is going to take time, of course. But again, How quickly can he get that figured out? Because we need his bat to take off. This lineup needs his bat to take off. One of the guys that struggled mightily for this lineup last season. And again, we talk about multiple guys in this lineup that struggled for the New York Mets. It was Alvarez, it was McNeil, it was Nimmo, and we're kind of thankful that the Mets got to where they got to in 2024, given those three players' struggles as everyday players in this lineup. So Francisco Alvarez, batting in the 2-hole today, doing the catching duties, takes the over. And again, with the new mechanics, it's not so much about the result, but about the process. Is he on time? Is he getting his load up in the right time to put his hands in the best position to go ahead and swing the bat? I haven't seen that just yet from Francisco Alvarez. Of course, it is still very early into the season, and that's where I'm going to be monitoring. So, and again, Jesse Winker now is in the second game that we've seen him in action. He's going to be the platoon DH going forward. We can assume if Starling Marte stays on this team, he goes 1-for-3 with a base hit down the line, the right field line, pulling the baseball and driving in Luis Angel Acuna for the game's first run in that first inning. So the progression, if you didn't get a chance to watch, I'm just simply recapping some of the action that I was watching. Luis Angel Acuna, first inning, strong start, base hit, steals second, goes to third on a wild throw by the catcher. I actually didn't see if that was the catcher's fault or if it was the infielder's fault who was covering second base. It doesn't matter. Luis Angel Acuna gets to third. Now he's on third base with 1 out, and Jesse Winker gets the job done. And again, these at-bats that Jesse Winker is drawing, especially the end result being the hit, how many pitches did he see in that at-bat? It seemed like it was 7, 8, 9 different pitches, fouling some off. That's the type of process that I like to see, taking the baseball and watching it all the way through and fighting off some of those tough pitches from, the opposing pitcher. So I like what I'm seeing out of Jesse Winker. And just before I get ahead of myself here, I want to shout out the chat. You guys are nothing but, awesome, amazing, supporting of the channel. And we're going to continue to break down this action and all the news, but I have to take a look at the chat here as the comments pile up. So I definitely appreciate you all being here early in your Tuesday afternoons. Brad is here. Doug is here. Darren's here. Paula. Shout out to Paula. John is stating, I'm hearing a trade is in the works. Marcus Stroman for Brett Baty. I hope it happens, John. Wherever you're getting that information from, I'm going to be the first one to tell you that it is not happening. And I actually know exactly which account you saw this coming from, and I'm telling you that is not true. So I apologize that you got tricked, but hopefully I can do my due diligence in terms of giving you all the proper necessary information, because there's no chance, at least I am assessing the situation, that there's no chance that the Mets bring back Marcus Stroman, especially not in a 1-for-1 swap for Brett Baty. So I hear you, but just be wary of the sources that we're all listening to on social media. Shout out to Daniel, Steve, Steven. I appreciate you all being here again. It means a lot. And Paul is saying, please no Stroman. I know he's having a lot of problems over there in the Yankees organization. And quite simply, I just think that the Mets, are more likely than not to go internal. And again, I just don't see that reunion with Marcus Stroman happening. And that's just quite simple. That's what I'll leave it at. So moving on forward into this game with the lineup, Tyrone Taylor, who's going to be in that split role. He gets the nod at left field today, goes 0-for-2, but he's going to be splitting time with Jose Siri, who actually homered here. And we'll talk about him in just a second. But can we talk about Brett Baty for 1 second? Can we talk about Brett Baty off to a tremendous start to his spring training? Now, we've seen this all before, right? We've seen Brett Baty shine against some of the lesser pitching, some of the lesser competition, especially in the minor leagues. And then he comes up and does nothing effectively in the major leagues. But again, if the Mets are giving him this last ditch effort, whether they were shopping him this offseason or not, I don't know. I don't have that information. But if he is getting this last chance to make the roster, maybe building up some of that trade value that I think Brad was saying up in the chat, this is a great way to start off your spring training. This is exactly the type of start that Mets fans and Brett Baty himself probably envisioned in that scenario. 2-for-3 today. He dumps a base hit into left field, an opposite field hit. It was a blooper falling right in front of the left fielder, but then he smacks, actually, the home run came first. So he smacks a home run to right center field. the wind kind of carried it a little bit, and there was a lot of baseballs that were flying over the fence with the help of the wind to that part of the ballpark, and it looked like a little bit of an awkward swing. It looked like Brett Baty made a mid-swing adjustment, and the follow-through was kind of awkward, but he got enough. I think it was a pretty decently well-hit baseball, and he puts it out of the yard, and now that's, what is that, 4 hits? He's 4 for 7 or 4 for 8 in his spring training so far across the action that he's seen in the early goings over here in late February as we approach the calendar month of March. So I like what I'm seeing from Brett Baty. He's making some of the defensive plays at third base as well. We know he's getting reps all around the diamond. He looks really locked in at the plate. Now, he does have a couple of infield singles. Again, he had the bloop hit. So I'm not saying that he's ripping the cover off of the baseball every single time he's up. But again, I always preach, if I'm going to preach process over results, I can at least respect and appreciate the type of at-bats that he is putting together, whatever the end result may be. It just so happens that he's 4 for 8 with a home run and a double under his belt. 2 of his 4 hits are for extra base hits, which is exactly what we wanted to see out of Brett Baty. Can he put some lift into the baseball? Can he fix and turn his ground ball rate around, right? That was near 50%, just under maybe, something that's unacceptable for a major league hitter to find success, especially in the year of 2025, putting the baseball on the ground that much and not necessarily having the speed to beat some of those infield hits out. That's what we want to see out of Brett Baty. So it seems like he's finding lift on the baseball, and that is a good sign. So shout out to Brett Baty getting off to a very hot start in spring training. How about Jose Siri taking the 1 for 2 with a solo home run? Absolute pimp job on that home run, by the way. Bat flip and everything. It was a hanging changeup, I believe, that he absolutely smokes out to left field. I love the enthusiasm. Again, what you're going to get out of Jose Siri is energy. No matter what, he's going to provide you energy both in the field and in the batter's box. And that's what I can appreciate out of Jose Siri, 100%. So it's good to see him get on the board. First home run as a New York Met following that trade between the Mets and the Rays this offseason. Again, he's going to be splitting time. He can be a frustrating player at times in terms of his approach at the plate or lack thereof, but he actually, on the rare occasion, can draw a walk like he did today. He actually drew a walk. So that is a very good sign. And when we were on the post game yesterday, if you missed that post game, again, please do check that out in the description down below. Rob and myself were assessing, the games that we saw. Jose Siri, again, is a frustrating player at times, but I really do think if the Mets can reach deep into their bag with this hitting lab that Jeff McNeil has been talking about with this organization. We've been talking about pitching lab this and pitching lab that. What about the hitting lab? If the Mets can go ahead and find a way to increase the selectiveness out of Jose Siri, maybe draw a couple of walks out of that 8 or 9 spot that he's going to be consistently hitting in come opening day, right? And throughout the course of the entire 2025 season, if the Mets are able to instill some patience from Jose Siri while simultaneously getting those 18 to 20 home runs, maybe 20 plus that he'll post, that's going to be a fantastic sign in terms of balancing the lineup and getting away from this top heavy lineup in terms of your top 5 or 6 and creating a more well-balanced lineup. And at that point, the Mets won't have to rely on a guy like Luis Angel Acuna right away to be that 9-hole hitter to flip the lineup over. That can be Jose Siri. And I'm talking about a Javi Baez 2.0 situation where it seemed like in the short stint with Javier Baez, years back when he was a New York Met for half a season, something clicked with Javi Baez and his approach that he was going to lay off some of those pitches, and you saw his walk rate increase exponentially. I'm hoping there's nothing that's going to suggest to me right now that Jose Siri, the same thing's going to happen with Jose Siri, but I am hoping and praying that the Mets can go ahead and make that adjustment for Jose Siri and help him out at least in that realm. I'm not sure whose job that is, whether it's the hitting coaches, whether it's him just sitting down and watching film, but that's something that I'm definitely looking out for. And then your bottom three hitters in today's ball game, Luis Torrens taken to 0 for 2. Clearly, he's going to be the backup catcher to Francisco Alvarez, who we just went over a couple of minutes ago. Jared Young getting a lot of first base reps. We know he has the ability to play second base, although he hasn't done it in however many years. I want to say 6 or 7 years, going back earlier into his career, and also can play a corner outfield spot. It's interesting that he's getting a lot of reps at first base. But again, when I talked about my top 5 players to watch in spring training, with him playing overseas, for a portion of last season, and really having success when he really didn't have success in the Cubs organization just a couple of years ago. Going 2 for 2, taking a baseball the opposite way. He's a left-handed hitter, which is going to, help him in trying to make a roster spot. And again, if Brett Baty doesn't win the job, maybe if the Mets still prefer a left-handed bat off the bench, you could be talking about Jared Young, who could be classified, I guess, as a utility player. It's going to be hard for him to make the team if the Mets don't view him as any positional fit, or a fit for any position outside of first base, given the presence now of Pete Alonso. Clearly, Pete Alonso, that's his position, right? So I'm still watching Jared Young, watching his at-bats and seeing if he can make some noise, especially, with Nick Madrigal's leave, who I'll talk about here in just a couple of slides as well. Getting some news surrounding the New York Mets last night in a trade and a corresponding move of placing Madrigal on the 60-day IL. And then Donovan Walton offensively in this game goes 1 for 3 in that 9-hole while playing shortstop. So that is your recap in terms of the lineup 1 through 9. Again, a lot of good swings. Jose Siri, Brett Baty, both homering. I saw a good swing out of Jesse Winker. Francisco Alvarez needs a little bit of work in terms of those mechanics still and trying to get right in terms of his timing. Again, it's not a mechanical issue. He just fixed his mechanics, right, from last season. So we can't really jump to conclusions and say that it's a mechanical issue. But every time a hitter makes a mechanical tweak, something is going to be different in that chain of processes that goes into a full swing. And it just looks like his timing is completely off right now as he tries to gain his footing. So that's Francisco Alvarez in a nutshell, and what I think is off with him right now in the first couple of appearances in spring training. And then Luis Angel Acuna, needs to get some timing work done as well on the off-speed pitches, but it's nice to see him get a single and using that speed, right? We always talk about stolen bases, both in the Venezuelan Winter League that Luis Angel Acuna appeared in this past offseason, as well as the minor league farm system in his entire career so far, using that speed when he gets on base and not hesitating to steal like we saw today. But yeah, shout out to the chat here. I know that Yamit is saying Jared Young can't make the team. No room for 2 first basemen. Again, like I said, he's played second base in his career. He hasn't played it in a while, so I don't think he's a fit there. And he plays the corner outfield. So maybe you are correct, Yamit, in that sense, is that, the 2 positions that he can play are already filled up by Pete Alonso and just exponential depth, right? In the roster, Nimmo, Soto, you can put Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor in those corner outfield spots. Starling Marte, who we'll talk about here in just a second as well. So I agree with that, right? It seems like he's a long shot to make the team, but in this case, you never know. And if he finds his way to AAA Syracuse as depth, at least we know, hopefully, if he continues to prove it, that we could have a competent hitter on our hands as that depth throughout the 2025 season. So let's see here. Let's get into some of the comments. Again, I appreciate you all. Game is saying, I love Baty. Game is his greatest defender. Mets coaches ruined his swing last year. He needs to not listen to them. They also eliminated Alvy's power. And that's a really good point there, Game. And I definitely agree with you. With those mechanics, I think that his timing, when he gets into his load, I'm breaking down, swing mechanics 101 here. I think he's going to have to get into his load relatively early in terms of the pitcher's windup, because it just seems like there's a lot of moving parts, but it also, right, doesn't seem the most conducive in terms of establishing or reestablishing that power that really made him, MLB Pipeline's top prospect coming up in the Mets farm system. I hope I'm wrong, but it does seem the early indications right now I would say that you are correct in your assessment that Francisco Alvarez's power, it seems to be diminishing. And I'm not really sure those mechanical adjustments are going to help him in terms of reestablishing that. But again, I'd love to be wrong. And I don't want to make any erroneous assumptions here in the early goings of spring training, but I'm just kind of forward thinking and just seeing how this is going to play out. And I'm not really sure I'm the biggest fan, but hopefully he proves all of us wrong, right? That's what we like. That's what we want at the end of the day. Shout out to D in the chat saying Baty hitting missiles, and let's lock in, chat. Absolutely, D. I appreciate the support. John saying, thank you, CP. I agree with you. Yeah, John. I mean, again, valid questions, valid comments, anything that you all see, please definitely, feel free to put it in the chat that you see on social media. But, that post that's been going around, or multiple posts that have been going around suggesting that Marcus Stroman will be on his way to Queens back to Queens, I should say, in lieu of the recent pitching and rotation injuries that this team has sustained so far with Montas and now Sean Manaea, I think it's very far-fetched, and I would not expect that to happen. I mean, stranger things definitely have happened, but I don't expect that to be on the horizon for the New York Mets. Moving on into this game, again, please do feel free to drop those comments in the live chat if you're new, if you like these breakdowns in the post-game. I love assessing what we all saw on the screen and recapping what I saw on the screen for you all to catch up if in case you missed the game today. I know people are busy, got work and everything. That's the offense that I just broke down. The pitching, I really don't need to get into because in terms of the personnel that the Mets threw out there, from Waddle all the way down to, Austin Warren and Garcia, these guys are not really expected to make regular contributions for the New York Mets outside of the guy that you see in the middle of your screen and in this graphic, and Reed Garrett, who posted one scoreless inning with one strikeout as well. So again, there's not really much to talk about. Waddell, I believe, also pitched and spent some time overseas. I think he was in Korea. I'm not quite sure exactly where he went to, but it was potentially KBO. He had a little bit of a rough going. An inning and a third, he reached his pitch limit. No strikeouts, no putaways in that category. One thing that I did want to say in terms of these pitchers is on the opposite end of this game with the Houston Astros, how about their top prospect, right? In Cam Smith that they got from the Chicago Cubs in that Kyle Tucker trade. Cam Smith was the headliner, one of the Cubs' top prospects, in that farm system. He takes two baseballs to the opposite field for home runs, and his first two home runs as a Houston Astro. That kid's going to be really good. The Houston Astros, I know Kyle Tucker, they didn't want to pay him, or they didn't think that they could pay him in his free agency coming up, but doing their due diligence and getting a guy and a player to the caliber of Cam Smith is a really good get by the Houston Astros. And we saw that today and what his potential at the major league level is going to be. So 2 home runs, a multi-home run game for Cam Smith. And again, I know that doesn't really have anything to do with the New York Mets, but that's just like some top prospect conversations to have when we take a look at some of these young, exciting players getting ready to make a push at the major league level and establish their dominance at the major league level. Salute to Zach. I haven't talked to Zach in forever. Shout out to you, Sunny Days Media. Great Mets podcast over there as well. Make sure you go subscribe over to both Zach and Pask over there. I know you guys have seen Pask on my channel for quite some time, especially if you've been an early subscriber going back years now. Baty opening day second baseman, Zach is saying. That's a little bit of a hot take. Listen, Rob and I have been talking about this. It's seemingly Jeff McNeil's position to lose, in my humble opinion, but it's really interesting that you bring this up because of the amount of reps that Brett Baty has been getting at second base, even going back to last season in the minor league farm system. I mean, I forgot exactly what the number was, but he was getting a lot of games started at second base toward the tail end of the season. And now he's taking all these reps. I see on X, in these clips being posted that he's turning double plays. He looks good. The bat clearly looks good, as I just mentioned. So that's a little bit of a hot take. McNeil hasn't really impressed me so far with the bat either. He's getting off to a little bit of a slow start. Again, pitchers are always going to be ahead of hitters when we're assessing these games very early on. The calendar not even hitting March, but that is a very, very interesting note. And I'm not even sure where Brett Baty would fall under in terms of the depth chart at second base, because let's say that Jeff McNeil does win that starting second base gig. And if you're putting Brett Baty in as your last roster bench player, because this is a conversation, that's what my live chat poll is geared towards. If we all think that Brett Baty has the chance in making this team as one of the last lefty bench spots, right? In that last lefty bench spot, if Jeff McNeil doesn't perform, are they going to pull the plug on Jeff McNeil early and go to Luis Angel Acuna, who would be a call-up from AAA? Or would they turn to Brett Baty at second base and what is a little bit of an experiment at that point, right? Up the middle with Lindor defensively and just trying to get that trade value up potentially, or just seeing if he has a long-term position in this organization at second base. So, Zach, I appreciate you. That's an interesting point, and I really have not thought about that because I don't think it's going to happen, but it's a very interesting, I guess, idea to ponder on. I'll let you all know exactly what I think about that in a future stream as the season progresses and we get a little bit more sample size of Brett Baty this spring training. But yeah, I like where you're going down that route. I just can't see it happening as of yet. I don't see that vision fully just yet. So yeah, I appreciate everybody here in the chat. Thank you for taking your time out of your day to be here. I'm just skimming through some of these comments here. Zach, shout out to Zach, shout out to Brad again. The Mets backup first baseman is your starting third baseman. I can see Young still making the team. I think there's an outside chance of Young making the team, but again, I think that if he continues to impress with his bat, you know, him being a lefty definitely changes the ball game 100%. But yeah, if you guys don't follow me on social media already, I'm usually live tweeting these games. Again, these are for all the new subscribers that are here on the channel. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And you know, we'll be doing these post games pretty regularly on in this 2025 season. So it has been a minute, Zach, 100%. And D is basically echoing the same thing that I've been saying over the past couple of streams here. You know, with Rob, McNeil will have a 2-month leash tops to start this season. Yeah, I'm really curious about what that timetable is going to look like for Jeff McNeil if he doesn't get the bat going. Now, again, the best case scenario and the best outcome for the New York Mets' success in 2025 is if Jeff McNeil just figures it out. You put him as the opening day starter, and he figures it out with the bat, and he takes off, and we don't have to worry about that. But in the off chance that Jeff McNeil doesn't, one, I want to see how quickly this Mets regime pulls the plug on the McNeil experiment at this point, you know, given the lack of success in the batter's box the last couple of seasons, but also who's going to be that fill-in at second base now with a couple of options. And if it gets to a point where it's later on in the season, right, after 2 months, after 2.5 months, like you're saying, D, at that point, we could assume that Ronnie Mauricio could be ready, ramping up and spending the first couple of months in AAA. Maybe they give him a chance. So I would not discount if it gets to that point a couple of months into the season that it could be Ronnie Mauricio as well. So that's something to definitely monitor. Hold on 1 second. I got to let out a quick cough and get some water. Hold on 1 second. All right. I appreciate you all. My throat's a little dry with the seasons changing and everything. Springtime is in the air, but unfortunately, I do have allergies. All right. So these are the latest notes from Mets spring training. I talked about Nick Madrigal, you know, earlier on the channel, earlier in this stream as we're approaching 30 minutes. I'm not going to hold you all too long during this stream. It's an early afternoon stream. Actually, it's approaching 5 o'clock, so it's approaching evening time. But Nick Madrigal has been put on the 60-day IL by the New York Mets. This was the corresponding move in the trade between the Mets and the Cubs that we saw go down last night. And the second bullet point states that. And by the way, Nick Madrigal's speedy recovery to him, what we thought was a dislocated shoulder, Still probably is a dislocated shoulder, but he also has a shoulder fracture as well after undergoing an MRI. So that's going to keep him out a very long time. Wishing him a speedy recovery. Always hate to see injuries. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter what their contributions could have been or not have been in the season. Hate to see injuries. So speedy recovery to Nick Madrigal. But in the corresponding move, all this talk about Jose Iglesias, bring back Mr. OMG. The Mets opt for a different route, and they trade for Cubs outfielder Alexander Canario, and I was kind of like, when this trade first went down, I was like, who? Who is this guy? I believe he's 24 years old. He's had a cup of coffee at the MLB level over the past couple of seasons in the Cubs organization. Clearly, he hasn't stuck with that organization because they DFA'd him and then subsequently traded him. 24 years old. I get to looking at his baseball reference page and some numbers are popping out at me. I'm like, hold on here. About 21, 22 games collectively at the MLB level for the Chicago Cubs over the past couple of seasons. It seems like the numbers were decent. He had 28 plate appearances last season for the Chicago Cubs, right? That was a team that fell out of contention. So I didn't watch too much Cubs baseball, but I can only assume that he potentially was, a player that they put out there regularly as soon as they knew they weren't making the playoffs to see what he had. What did he post? A 280 batting average? I don't have the baseball reference page pulled up right in front of me, but nearly an 800 OPS. I take a look at his minor league numbers. The home runs pop out at me. Back in 2022, collectively across multiple levels, he had 37 home runs. You know what I mean? I believe in 2023 or 2024, I forgot which year it was, but 18 home runs. So clearly he has some pop in his bat. He's an outfielder. So he's not really that replacement, I guess, for Nick Madrigal, but you can assume with Luis Angel Acuna already having Jeff McNeil, Ronnie Mauricio coming back into the picture, you have infield depth that we just went over with some of these names. So adding a high upside player, right? When we're talking about high upside players all offseason long, you could label Alexander Canario in that category. Now, again, the most interesting part of this trade, because he's 24 years old, mostly a minor league ball player, how many minor league options does he have? Right? That's my first question. That was my first question. The answer is 0. He has 0 minor league options available. So the Mets can either do one of two things here, right? They can go ahead and have him compete for a roster spot, potentially losing out if he doesn't make the roster and somebody else picking him up. Or an interesting proposal that I saw floating around on Mets social media was that this could be a potentially flippable prospect that the Mets trade for and then subsequently trade to another team, whether it's solo or in a package deal, right? Starling Marte. We've heard so many, instances where the Mets want to trade Starling Marte and get him off the books, whether it's for pitching help. So that was interesting. That wasn't my immediate thought process because I'm like, okay, this guy has pop. He seems like he has a competent bat. Why not give him a full shot? If the Cubs didn't want to and they didn't value him, then why don't the Mets give him a full shot? And he can also play all 3 outfield positions. So this is an interesting move. I'm not sure if I'm looking into it too much. You all can let me know if you think I am, but it's food for thought at this point. So in order to make room for him on the 40-man roster, I believe they put him on the 40-man roster, if I'm not mistaken. I think they had to. Nick Madrigal gets put on the 60-day IL, and the Mets trade for Alexander Canario, outfielder, recently of the Chicago Cubs, 24 years old, 0 minor league options, versatile glove, and now I think that he'll be in Mets spring training, if I'm not mistaken. So very curious. That was a curious move for me. And the Mets, all they had to do is give up cash considerations. So it wasn't really like they gave up any sort of, player talent or prospects in return for what seems like a high upside guy. So I don't really know. Maybe the Cubs saw something they didn't like and the Mets decided to take a chance, or maybe, Canario's just depth at this point. I don't know. But it seems like with the numbers that I saw, he's had some success, both at the major league level, a little bit less of a sample size, but also at the minor league level consistently over the past couple of seasons. So, maybe he clears waivers if he doesn't make the roster, right? I think it'd be a far shot for him to make the roster if Starling Marte is going to stick around. We've been talking about that for quite some time now, Starling Marte in that situation. But maybe a guy, if he clears waivers, that the Mets can stash as outfield depth in AAA, which is, never a bad move. You can never have too much depth, as we see in terms of the pitching talk, right? So again, as we just discussed, the Mets dropped spring training game today to the Astros. Excuse me for the typo, not the Cardinals. It was the Astros. This is what happens when I put these slides together too quickly. But the other thing that I really wanted to talk about here, because again, the theme for the last couple of post games, especially with the Montas injury, especially with the Manaea injury, everybody's panic city, it seems like. I'm not so much panic city. I think that the Mets need to make a move, whether it's internal or external. I'd prefer them go down the external route because I think that there's a clear and obvious candidate if you go the external route. And Jose Quintana, I've been talking about him a multitude of times, but I've also talked about the internal route where you would have to rely on Tyler Miguel at that point. Not that I want to, but they would have to, given the names that this organization has. They can take a chance on Max Kranick, and they can move Jose Butto. I know that not everybody's a fan of this, and they want to keep the consistency afloat with Jose Butto from where he left off last season in the bullpen. But there is a world where Jose Butto could be that rotation fill-in, as we saw him be last season, right? At least for the first couple of months until Montas comes back, until Manaea comes back. But, for me, in assessing the moves that should be made, I just don't see at this point. I know he's not going to be that perfect Band-Aid for this rotation that's missing 2 top 5 guys now at this point. But Jose Quintana, I'm just like continuing to watch that name. Jose Quintana yesterday, who was pitching or scheduled to pitch for Team Colombia in their World Baseball Classic qualifiers, got pulled from the game. And all of the reporters that were covering that story, were saying that it's because he is nearing an agreement, and in that contract that he is about to sign for the 2025 season, they don't want him pitching for Team Colombia. So I don't know what's going on. Whether it's the Mets or some other club, watch out for news surrounding Jose Quintana. If not this evening, then going into the next couple of days, because it seems like something could be imminent there with what we heard last night, or what I heard last night. I'm not sure if you all saw the same information. But as it pertains to the pitching, Tim Healy put out an article earlier today, basically stating that Kodai Senga will not pitch in spring training in-game action as of yet. And as of yet, I put in quotes because that's always going to be up to interpretation. There's a lot of people that are fearful that this could be the precursor into the Mets announcing something of an injury, right? Injury related for Kodai Senga. I don't think it is. I am going to put that to rest. I think it's precautionary that we have not seen and will not see Kodai Senga, at least for the next week or two, in spring training in-game action. He has been throwing bullpen sessions. I've seen multiple clips of him doing so. He has been throwing on-field batting practice to live hitters. We've seen multiple clips of him pitching to Pete Alonso, Juan Soto, etc. We've seen it. So he's been out there in spring training. I think that this is strictly precautionary out of the New York Mets, especially in lieu of the 2 rotation injuries now that they have to deal with. There's no reason to rush Kodai Senga. We don't know what his regimen was this offseason in terms of throwing the baseball. We don't know how long it's going to take him to get ramped up and getting comfortable to go out there in game action for a couple of innings. So I would not read into this at all at this point until further notice. I know there's going to be people out there that see this and they're going to run with it. And they're going to be like, oh, Senga's hurt. Automatically thinking the worst. I mean, it's a possibility. It's a slim possibility. But if you ask me, I'm here to give my opinions. My opinion is that this is nothing. This is just precautionary from the New York Mets. So we will keep an eye out on that. I thought that it was at least interesting that that was surfacing at this point in spring training. Stan, shout out to Stan. Huge supporter of the channel. I definitely appreciate you. I saw Senga's bullpen work. He looked amazing, very fluid and strong, velo and effortless. 100%. Ray, shout out to Ray. Did Siri's homer land yet? Did his bat land yet from that bat flip? I love it. I'm thoroughly looking forward to Jose Siri bat flips in 2025. I know not everybody is, but it's exciting, and I'm looking forward to it. D saying, I like Buto in the pen, and I agree, right? In the perfect world scenario, the Mets at full strength, yeah, he's a bullpen guy, right? As he showed with his numbers in the second half, not so much the playoffs, but the second half of last season. He did better in the bullpen than the rotation. But if the Mets continue to talk about these internal options surrounding the rotation, if they don't want to go out there and get a guy like Quintana and pay that extra penalty money on top of whatever money they dish out in a contract, it would make sense as a short-term solution to have him go back into the rotation, at least in my eyes, right? And I would be willing to do that. I'd much rather see Jose Buto in the rotation early in the season than Griffin Canning. Griffin Canning is a long reliever. That's his role. That's what he was brought in here to be, I hope. Given his lack of success over the last couple of seasons on other respective teams, and I'd like to keep him in that role. I don't need to see him start any games because I don't have any confidence in Griffin Canning. But Jose Buto, we've seen him pitch deep into ball games earlier on in the 2024 season, and he can do it. So if the Mets are going internal, that's the quick fix. It's not the long-term fix. It's the short-term fix, but it's a fix. So that's what I'm proposing. But yeah, monitoring Kodai Senga. I'm sure he'll throw more live batting practice sessions in a controlled environment. Mendoza talked about a controlled environment for Kodai Senga. This could be the Mets starting to worry and being extra careful about the rotation to prevent any other injuries, right? You've already got 2 starters down. You really don't want to rush these guys if they're truly not ready to appear in-game action full speed and risk something else happening. Because whether there was a question, as to who was going to start opening day for the Mets, it's not a question anymore. There was a long debate between myself and Rob whether it was Senga. I thought it was going to be Senga. He thought it was going to be Minaya. But now clearly, with Minaya starting his season off on the IL, it's going to be Kodai Senga. So you need to do, and the Mets need to do everything that they can to preserve his health at this point. But again, if the Mets are able to go ahead and make a trade this late into the game in spring training for a guy like Starling Marte, clearing his money off the books, you're going to have to package to get anything of value in return. Starling Marte, with the amount of money he's going to be making, you're not only going to have to eat money if you're the New York Mets, which Steve Cohen has already shown a willingness to do, but you're going to have to package Marte with another prospect or another MLB-ready name. And if you're able to get his money off of the books, at least 10 to 12 million, maybe 8 to 10 million, to offset the cost of another contract coming in, you can make a corresponding trade, right? Or maybe it's the same trade for Starling Marte for another starting pitcher. And there's been a lot of speculation, not speculation, but, at least just teasers and conversations starting about approaching a team that doesn't really have any playoff contending aspirations in 2025. At least I don't think they do, with the lack of moves they made this offseason. And that's the St. Louis Cardinals. Should the Mets be interested and should they pursue a guy that they were on the verge of potentially signing last offseason when David Stearns first came into the organization? And that is Eric Fetty, who inevitably went to the Chicago White Sox last season, if you don't remember. And he got traded midway through the season to the St. Louis Cardinals. He spent the entire season in the KBO in 2023. He had an abysmal time in 2022 with the metrics that he was posting. So he went over there, used that as his get-right season, so to speak, and came back and posted phenomenal numbers in both a White Sox and a Cardinals uniform. 177 and a third innings pitched, a 3.30 ERA, 1.16 in the walks and hits per innings pitch category in 31 games started. This is a guy, again, that doesn't really carry that much of a contractual hit. He's scheduled to make only $7.5 million in the 2025 season, which is what I can only assume is what Jose Quintana's market is at this point via free agency. So it's kind of like a pick your poison situation here. But could the Mets make a late trade in the midst of them saying, oh, it's going to be internal this, internal that? If they are able to offload some money somewhere, anywhere, doesn't have to be Starling Marte, but anywhere, to feel comfortable with bringing money on, could they take on a guy like Eric Fetty, who would be a pretty damn good addition to this rotation, especially with the numbers that he added or posted in 2024? Even if the Mets still had Montas and Manaea and they were not injured, he would still be a very good addition, I would say, especially looking at how this offseason has transpired on the pitching front. I would welcome this 100%. Now, again, the injured rotation would look like this. This would effectively keep Jose Butto in the bullpen, like it seems like everybody wants to do outside of me. But you'd still have to rely on Paul Blackburn and Tyler McGill. Or maybe a Max Kranick to make some spot starts until Montas or Manaea comes back. But this is an interesting name at the very minimum to keep an eye out on. Oh, and by the way, remember that guy Alexander Canario, who I just talked about, and him potentially being one of those flippable players and a guy that can make a contribution and potentially get everyday reps on a team in the St. Louis Cardinals that don't have any playoff aspirations and are looking for this young talent? Yeah, they would take a guy like Alexander Canario. But again, at that point, I'm inclined to believe, why wouldn't have they just traded for Canario themselves and just gave up the cash in order to find a potential high upside gem? But again, that's a separate discussion. At this point, we don't know what David Stearns is thinking. We don't know if there's going to be any corresponding moves. I know it's not really in his realm, to make reactionary moves. I do think at the very minimum, the Mets have to do something. If they're going internal, you have to make that switch from Jose Butto, from the bullpen to the rotation. I've been very adamant, and I will continue to be adamant that my only stipulation, I can live with Tyler McGill getting another chance as the sixth starter, right? If Paul Blackburn isn't ready, you got to have Jose Butto. Or if Paul Blackburn is ready, I'd rather just have Tyler McGill either coming out of the bullpen or starting in AAA and still putting Jose Butto in that rotation. So that's the internal route. But there's still multiple external routes that they can take via trade and free agency that I discussed in this video, in this stream, and previous videos on my channel that they could do if David Stearns is inclined to do so. Chat, let me know. Would you take a chance and approach the Cardinals at this juncture for Eric Fetty? Yes or no? Let me know. I'm going to look in the comment section right now in the live chat. Yes or no? A simple yes or no would suffice to Eric Fetty. Because listen, at this point, again, David Stearns was already interested in him last offseason. It came down to two teams. That was the report. It was the White Sox and the Mets. He went to the White Sox on a 2-year deal. So if this is the guy that David Stearns previously had interest in, knowing that this rotation at this point is thin, and what he posted, Eric Fetty, that is, in 2024, why would he still not have interest? So just introducing this name and this idea to you all to think about. All right, let's get back into some of the comments here. Some of the comments. I appreciate you all. You guys are keeping me entertained here in the comment section. Big fan of Fetty, says Zach. This is a guy that, honestly, I'm going to be honest and hold myself accountable, I wanted no parts of. Watching him for so long in a Nationals uniform, I wanted no parts of Eric Fetty last offseason and was happy that he went, right, to Chicago. But clearly he figured something out in the KBO mechanically, because that was the big thing with Fetty, was that he went over there to use the pitching lab. They've got a lot of good coaches and a lot of good tools over there in helping these reclamation project pitchers out in hopes of going back to the MLB and finding success, which is exactly what Eric Fetty did. It was a test year for him in the first year of that 2-year deal, and he succeeded by and large with those numbers. And again, you take a look at it, it's not a tale of two halves for Eric Fetty. So again, this is another typo on my screen. I apologize. I was rushing. Where it says first half, that should say 2022. And where it says second half, that should say 2024 on your screen for you all to follow along. Look at the differentials between the 22 season and the 2024 season for Eric Fetty. That 2023 season that he spent in the KBO did wonders for him. He increased his strikeout percentage closer, much closer to league average. League average is just over 22%. He was around 21.2%. He decreased his walk rate by nearly 3%. So that tells me control and command of his pitches, his full arsenal. That's what that year in 2023 was spent doing. Oh, and by the way, he also reduced the hard hit rate by a large margin as well. Just under 6% in doing my mental math here. So again, this is a completely reinvigorated new version of Eric Fetty that we saw in 2024. Can he continue that success in 2025? Is there a slim chance, or is there, I guess I should say a decent chance that he reverts back to his previous years before he went over to Korea to play baseball? Yeah, there's still a slim chance, right? That's not to say that he found 1 year of success and that's what he's automatically going to be, if you make a trade for him. But at this point, it's not panic time, but it's getting to desperation time in terms of putting together a competent rotation to hold you afloat in the months of April and May and waiting for Montas and Manaea to get back. So I just wanted to introduce this to you all. This is what a rotation would look like. It's still not pretty. I would agree with that, assessment. It's still not pretty, but it's a hell of a lot better than looking at Griffin Canning taking up one of your rotation spots. So, because at that point, if Griffin Canning is going to be your sixth starter, some people might say, oh, that doesn't really do us much harm. Every sixth day, he's probably going to be the opener, but that's eating into your bullpen at that point. If you're using Griffin Canning as an opener every sixth day, that means that's a bullpen day. And that's going to affect every other day for the New York Mets. And if that cycle continues for the first 2 months, you're looking at a worn out bullpen, starting June. And as a Mets fan, going through a bunch of seasons where the Mets haven't performed in June, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go down that route. So at least, even given the circumstances, put together a rotation that can eat innings and you won't need an opener for. That's kind of why I'm hesitant about Tyler McGill, because he's not that type of pitcher. And he's proven not to be that type of pitcher. That's why I do want Jose Butto, because he's going to give you 5 to 6 solid innings pretty much every start. And he's going to keep you in the ball game. So I rest my case there. Let's see. Sorry, Richard, for the typos. I know that you're on your phone. It's a little bit hard to see. Again, I put these slides together very quickly. Yeah. So again, with 2 starters down, a lot of Mets fans feel the need to panic again. We've talked about this. I know Rob is in full panic mode. We talked about this on the post game if you guys missed it. Yesterday, actually the last couple of post games that I did with him, I know that he's in panic mode and a lot of Mets fans are too. And you have every right to feel that way. I agree 100%. It's not a good look, especially when you take a chance on a guy like Frankie Montas for this to happen and start his season off in this manner. It's not a good look at all. But I do think that the rest of this roster, as good as it is, with the bullpen and the lineup, they can carry that heavy load in the first couple of months of the season until you get your rotation back to full strength. Is that the most ideal scenario in which we want to be talking about right now? No. That's why I'm saying it's a little bit of desperation time, but not quite full panic time, in my opinion. Again, just my opinion. I'm not here to say anybody's right or wrong. I'm not here to say I'm right or wrong, but just the way that I'm thinking about this team and how to mitigate these injuries, at least for the month of April, maybe midway through May, put together guys that can put together competent starts and get you 5 to 6 solid innings. No openers. No openers. So, again, this is the circumstances as Mets fans and this Mets front office that we've been dealt with. Injuries happen. It's a 162 game season. That's why baseball, I love this game. It's a blessing and a curse. It's a grueling season. There's going to be injuries. As Mets fans, we should be accustomed, right, to seeing these injuries happen. We've, especially in the past couple of seasons. So is this really a shock to anybody? Shouldn't be. We've been dealt this hand before. This team has been dealt this hand before. If there's any person, and again, I know there's a lot of Mets fans that don't want to hear me say this. I'm inclined to believe with the way that the Mets were continuously shuffling the bullpen and the rotation last season and still finding success in order to reach the NLCS, David Stearns deserves a little bit of credit in that realm. So I'm not saying that he's this utter genius, but let's see if he can do it. I'm willing to give him the chance to see if he can do it, given the circumstances, at least for the first half of the season. And Stearns, this is the thing, right? You don't have to be, pro Stearns. You don't have to worship the guy, right? He has his flaws. I'll tell you that straight up. Rob is a little bit more inclined to point out more of his flaws than I do, because I think that, again, with the sample size that we've seen out of him as president of baseball operations in his first season acting as Pobo, he deserves the benefit of the doubt. But that's not to say his philosophy isn't frustrating, Richard. You are very valid in that sense. His philosophy is frustrating as hell. And I'd be lying to you if I told you it wasn't. But at this point, I have to trust I'm going to trust the process. I don't have to. I'm choosing to trust the process until the process fails. The process succeeded in 2024. If it fails in the first half, I'm going to tell you all about it, because I'm not going to sit here and lie to you all. But I'm also not going to jump to conclusions just because the Mets have been dealt like this adversity with these 2 injuries early on into spring training. That's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to tell you all that the world is over and that the Mets season is over before it's even started, because it's not. They play 162 for a reason. There's how many months? April, I should say the later part of March, April, May, June, July, August, September. There's 6 months in a season for a reason, right? A lot of baseball to be played. So if you choose to talk about this team as if their season is over already, so be it. But I'm not going to do that. The Mets have to make some moves. They have to make at least one move for me to feel comfortable, or as comfortable as I can going into opening day. But again, I'm curious. Observatory. Is that a word? Observatory. I'm observing David Stearns to see if he can strike gold twice. It's not the easiest of routes, so he's not doing himself any favors there, but we'll see. And Travis is saying just this, right? I can't wait for the regular season regardless of the injury statuses of this team, right? Because there's depth at multiple positions, right? I know we don't want to hear it right now, and we'll see how that quote unquote depth does. But again, I think it's just a little bit silly and premature to tell everybody and talk about this team like the season is over before it started. So that's my opinion. I know others might disagree. I know a lot of people. Stearns has certainly built, his enemies in this fan base with the way that he goes about building rosters. And I understand it. It's frustrating, like Richard said. But I'm willing to see it through, at least for the first half. And at that point, if things don't work, but the Mets are hanging on by a thread because they've built this immaculate lineup, the best objectively that I've seen in my lifetime, if they are able to win the Mets a lot of ball games to sort of mitigate this hurt rotation, David Stearns better be wheeling and dealing at the deadline to continue this championship caliber aspirations that we've been all talking about the Mets entering 2025 with. So, yeah, that's basically what I'm going to say. These things, I mean, I guess Buto is better than Blackburn. Getting into some of the comments here, I want to make sure that I'm reading everything that you all are saying. I'm trying to skim comments here, so please be patient. And again, please thumbs up and subscribe on this stream and channel if you enjoy the content. Again, the way that I talk about the Mets isn't for everybody, right? I know that and again, if you oppose my opinions, I'm certainly never going to fault you for that. This is why I'm up here to begin with. I'm here to read everybody's comments and read your opinions. But, on February 25th, knowing the game of baseball, I'm never going to tell you that the sky is falling for the Mets, even given a couple of injuries that they've been dealt so far. So that's just the way that I choose to talk about this team. And if it's disastrous come mid-May or June, just like it was last season, I will have no hesitancy to tell you all that the team is garbage. But February 25th is too early to say that. And again, how can you not be excited, right? Even given these injuries, there's plenty to be excited for with the lineup, with the bullpen. It's not, again, I'm repeating myself a lot here in the last couple of minutes of this stream, and I do apologize, but I want to, at least ingrain this into this stream for anybody watching and for anybody that will watch, that this team has been constructed to still be able to win in a tough national league with the roster construction, even if injuries are present. And I think that, again, I'm going to trust David Stearns. If that's the cards that the Mets are dealt, I think that he is the one guy to be able to mitigate these injuries. So I'll say that. Shout out to Travis. Make sure you all, if you like in-game live streams for the New York Mets here on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to Travis's channel. He does a lot of good in-game streams, both for football and baseball. Giants fan, I believe, just as I am, right? As you can see, you can't see it, but the pennant up there. And also the Mets. Appreciate the super chat, $2 from Travis. And I appreciate the support on the channel. So continue to subscribe. Marcus is saying, tell you what, if the Mets lose as many games this coming April, May as they did last season, Steve Cohen will be pulling what remaining hair he has left on his head. Re-attendance figures. Yeah, 100%. That's funny. That made me chuckle, Marcus. I like that comment. So listen, guys, this is going to wrap up the stream. I don't really have anything else to say. I'm not telling you all that, Eric Fetty's a surefire thing. I'm not telling you all that Jose Quintana is a surefire thing in terms of coming into this organization to mitigate, these injuries that we've seen. But all eyes are on what David Stearns and the Mets do. You know what I mean? as it pertains to the luxury tax and bringing on any payroll, as it pertains to making corresponding moves via trade to offload payroll. All these things have to be taken into consideration. So, there's limited roster spots for a reason. And to bring guys in, you need to make roster moves in conjunction with the guys that you bring in. So, thank you all for tuning in. This has been the True Mets Talk podcast / Mets postgame show. I believe Rob's going to be live here in about an hour and 15 minutes. So make sure you all tune into his stream. He'll be up here with me, alongside me, hopefully in the next postgame show. But if not, I'll fly solo again. And this is the tandem. This is the dynamic duo that you all have all season long in 2025. Listen to post-game streams if you subscribe to my channel and his. So I appreciate you all. True Mets Talk Podcast, Mets post-game show. And until next time, TBD in terms of when I'm going live for another post-game. I will update you all on my social media, so follow me there. And also in the community tab, I usually post the thumbnail and letting you all know that I'm going live later this afternoon. So always turn on the notifications buttons. Again, let's go Mets. Spring training action rolls on as we head closer and closer to the month of March, inevitably closer to opening day. Peace.